So I'm going to ask Joyce and Linda to just talk to us a little bit about how they feel the exhibition is working between their works. Maybe we'll start off with Linda as the guest. So Linda, over to you.
Well, I think this is a gorgeous exhibition, and not because I'm in it, but because I just think it. You can sort of separate yourself a little bit as an artist. You see lots of exhibitions, and it's just. I think it's just so beautifully held together, and I was talking to someone and that I met here, and he sort of said it fantastically. He just said, how great to see such a smart exhibition, and that's what I feel like. I feel like it's so intellectually stimulating and visually really stimulating, which is, I think some people would think, like, how can you have such a visually stimulating exhibition with work being so minimal? But I actually don't see it as a minimal exhibition. I think it's incredibly vibrant and very active, and there's a beautiful conversation between the work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. And an energy, which is, of course, picked up in the title, so the objects and energies, and that's what's very interesting. Yeah, I think each of the artists work with drawing in a very, very different way. Joyce, tell us a bit about your work and here in the space.
Well, I'm just to respond to the first sort of question there about the whole exhibition. I think that there's a really fantastic kind of synergistic relationship between, I guess, conversations about energy, whether it's repetition or whether it's touch. And I guess for me, particularly with Linda's work, there's this relationship to touch, which is in Linda's work, that's the sensitivity of the touch and the energy in the touch and the line. And in my work, it's the evidence of people actually touching the work. And so there's these two very different relationships to touch that are taking place and feel that are taking place in the works that are really interesting. Then the other, I guess for me, is that question about the formalist aspects of the work. And I guess we all know that formalism and repetition has got energy, but I guess, again, there's a kind of literalisation in my work of that energetic relationship where the structures or the lights, just for example, the line sections these are the collectors, these are the capacitors in the drawings. The drawings are consisting of kind of antennas, which are loop antennas, and then the line sections of it, or the more graphic sections of it, are storage units, so that energy is actually being collected on the glass in them. And so there's a kind of strange, so there's sort of these two different kind of the formal relationship and then the touch relationship taking place on both sides for me. So I feel particularly excited, I guess, to be caught between to see those, to be in a context where both of those things are being featured. And it definitely, for me personally, frames the work in a really great way.
Can you tell us a bit about this aspect of touch and audience interaction that you've got in your drawings?
The works on the wall are all basically what's on the glass, except they were done on paper and they have those metal contacts on them, so they were all plugged into to exactly the same system that's running with the tables. So the loop, basically what they are loops, just big loops. And a loop antenna, and graphite's conductive, so when you make a loop, a conductive loop, what you get is basically an induction system, so that the energy in the atmosphere or the energy coming off your body creates a current in the drawing, and you can hear it if you amplify it. So it's sort of like and it's actually an antenna, and it's a kind of beginning of thinking about energy scavenging, about the amount of energy that's in the atmosphere and around us. And I also I love the idea that you could, with a pencil, draw something that you could steal a bit of the energy away from the environment. You know, I really love that idea. And I'm just, on these glass ones, I'm starting to use spray cans of industrial graphite. So that even kind of puts it back into the sort of street culture thing. And someone actually told me that there were kids in New York actually who've been extending the wireless network by spraying antennas on the walls, and then somehow I don't know how they do it.
I don't know.
Someone I was in an exhibition in San Jose in 01 for the Biennale there, and someone was looking at my work, looking at these antennas, and they said, "Oh, you know, these kids are doing this."
It's cool.
You know. So I think as we kind of energise the electromagnetic environment that we live in, with mobile phones, with electricity and everything, we get a lot of spillage, and it's really curious to sort of go back to the simplicity of a pencil and a drawing is as a mechanism for stealing it, the excess, I guess.
So Joyce's work is very broad in that way, because it has sound, and I'm afraid we've turned it off now because there's a bit of an echo, but we hear these low frequency energy in the environment that her works are, and to use her term, scavenging from the environment. Another interesting thing though with these drawings on the wall, they're exhibited on tables, for example, in the Indianapolis Museum of Art.
Yeah, so the drawings, there's an interesting kind of question, I guess, about, particularly with drawings, about not touching. It's like if your drawings are created by touching, and the sensitivity of touch, to then bring them into a museum and let people touch them. It's a real, whoa, no one was very comfortable about that. And I have to say, the 4 drawings that are on, there's 3 actually here that went to Indianapolis, to the exhibition called Graphite, and there's 4 that went to the big drawing show at Heidi. And after the one in Heidi, I think it was nearly 3 months of people touching it. So the drawings all contain all the evidence of interaction, which is really nice. But it does kind of end the drawings. And it also, it's taken a while to think about, I guess, I don't know, it's a funny thing about people they don't necessarily want to own the ones that have been touched.
That's so funny, because that's the ones that I'm so attracted to.
Yeah,
the touchier, the more interesting I find them. It's like whenever there's a catalog for an exhibition that I'm in, there's always the desk copy.
Yeah.
I always actually take the desk copy because it's the one that gets all handled and it's all fingerprinty, and I have like a collection of desk copy catalogs that I love them, because they're all a bit messy. But I thought it was really interesting. You said a couple of descriptions that were interesting, because I consider, you use the word scavenge and touch, and there was another one, and I wanted to remember it, and I can't remember what it is now. But I thought that was so interesting. Also I think that all 3 of us have an incredible attraction to the medium of graphite. So I think that that's actually something that hasn't been mentioned, but because mine are just graphite, and Agnes drew on her canvases with pencil, and so I love that graphite has these different, sides to it, and that's one of the reasons why I love it so much. But the touching thing is so interesting, because the touching of yours, and then I like that word because it's touching, right? And so that's so much what I'm interested in, that sort of energy between something that is touching. So I liked that when you were describing your work, I thought, oh, I do that too, but it's like the other side of it. So it's like there's this side and then there's the other side. And that's one of the things that happens in this exhibition, which I think is so interesting, because everything kind of mirrors each other, but then does, like, our work does that thing like magnets. So I was always fascinated by the magnet thing when I was a kid, where you could have two magnets and you try to put them together, and no matter what, they wouldn't go together, and then in the simple act of just turning it around, they were just attached to each other. And in a way, I feel like that's what happens at different moments in this exhibition with all the artists' work. You know, they touch each other, they mirror each other, they have this sort of like, you know, that energy where somebody will say, well, what does this and that have to do together, right? So it's that energy. But then, you know, you turn a corner or you put the headphones on and it's that energy. And I just think that's like so beautiful in here.
Just before we finish up talking about your work, could you just tell us a little bit about the most recent works which are made using a marbling technique? And I decided to hang them right at the beginning of the exhibition because in a way they're quieter. These ones have a more vibrant visual energy, and those ones perhaps are more reflective of some sort of universal natural element.
Building various kinds of antennas and looking at antenna, both sculptural and as graphic antennas, for quite a long time now, maybe coming up to like 20 years of thinking about it, and been really interested in, these are all fractal antennas, so they're all generated in, they're algorithmically generated, and they're generated in a piece of software called Mathematica, and then they're stencil. I cut a stencil and then I use as much graphite as I can get onto it, right? So the stencil's really just a way of really packing graphite in. But I have, in this process, I've started to sort of think about the fact that fractals are an approximation of nature. And so it means that if you kind of go through, keep going with the thought, you arrive at the thought, which is, if fractals are an approximation of nature, and we now have fractal antennas in our mobile phones, in our TVs, everywhere, like they've started to appear everywhere, then they must also probably occur naturally. So I've been starting to think about that a lot more, and I do a lot of bushwalking. I live in the Blue Mountains and we bushwalk in the Wallamai Wilderness, and we've been out at the Gardens of Stone, and out in the Gardens of Stone, for those of you who've been out there are these massive pagodas. They look like they come out of Thailand, and they're layers of conductive rock and non-conductive rock, and I've started to listen to them, and I've been looking at them, and then I started to read about how they were formed, and they're formed through a sort of like a water process whereby they're sedimentary, and then different chemicals have sedimented at different layers. So it's like whole like geological history of the Gardens of Stone, but it's absolutely amazing, and it made me realise that first I was trying to draw antennas, and I thought, well, my hand must be natural, I'm natural, but I wasn't quite getting what I wanted out of it. And then I realised that it was a water process that was forming in the geology in the Gardens of Stone, that was forming what, to me, start to look really like these antennas. So I started to look at water processes, and then someone rang me up and said, Joyce, have you ever looked at do-it-yourself ferrofluid? I'm like, wow, do-it-yourself ferrofluid. And they're like, get some photocopier carbon. I'm like, carbon and graphite's an allotrope of carbon. So yeah, I'm like, okay, carbon. Of course, it's carbon. And so I go and get this carbon from a photocopier machine, and I started to experiment with it, and now I've started to look at the Japanese ink technique, which is the suminagashi, where you float ink on water, and then also look at the Turkish Ebru, which is an oil-based system, which fits more with the ferrofluid, you know, the magnetic fluid. And so the drawings down the end are the first experiments that I've been doing with carbon, electrostatic carbon that I've got from out of the recycled bin from photocopiers, and various kinds of experiments with marbling, basically.
I love the process, and then there's this like incredibly beautiful object that has an incredible energy to it.
Well, I'm sorry if I lost you.
No, it's really interesting. But Linda, what I was going to ask you is there's a certain fluidity about your work as well, and you also use wax in a fluid state, do you not? But your work has also been described as luminous fields, which I think is a really nice description. This piece feels, when you look at it from one end, feels very luminous, and picking up the light from this gallery, you get an incredible sense of almost landscape or airscape or skyscape. Can you tell us a little bit about your two works, but also the photographs that you have in the exhibition?
I love the opportunity to show with the natural light, because you really actually in the natural light can see that luminosity. And like all the things that kind of happen, they're kind of more like they're like a result of a journey. And it's not a literal journey, and the process of making it, like the way how I use my materials, or just kind of like how I use my materials. The story is, that's the artist's journey. That's the mystery. One of the things that I love about art is that it is like nothing else. It's magic, and it's not. It's a place where you can go. You can go into an artwork, and you can just go somewhere, and it's not entertainment. It's not. It's like a spiritual journey without the sort of rhetoric of religion, and so it's mysterious, and I think that's where I go in the work, and it's where I hope to keep the door open so that other people can come into it also. Mark making is magical, and how one comes to it, like we couldn't come to it in any more opposite place, but it's that thing like a circle, right? It's like we're very opposite, but really it's the same. You get back to the same place, and it's the magic. Your excitement in it is the same kind of excitement that I get when a piece is finished. It's that. I don't have the scientific term, but I have that energy. It's the same energy, and that's that beauty thing that you can be so opposite, but really it's kind of the same thing that you're going for. And when you're listening to the rock, you're going deep, like really, really, really deep, and that's what I try to do in the studio, to go really, really, really deep. And it's hard. It's really hard. And then, but if you stay with it, then things happen, and like this is what's here. So it's very mysterious. It's a very mysterious process, but it's like going deep to find the truth, or the light, whatever it is that day that you're sort of searching for.
Both of you work in series as well, which I find very, very interesting. Certainly, with your work, Linda, the fact that it's drawn out across the wall in 16 in this case. And 20 in the other case, creates a sort of a building of what you're trying to do. And also Agnes Martin worked in series and multiples. She used printmaking a lot. So it's a really interesting aspect of each one of your works. Do either of you want to talk a little bit more about working series?
I don't know. I think that you're working, I don't know about, I work on a lot of things at the same time, and things kind of sort of naturally fall into their kind of areas. And I don't know, I kind of get, for whatever reason, I get obsessed with one thing, and then before I know it, they're all there. This is a little more unusual for my work. It was, the paper was a gift from another artist, from another project, and it's not the normal paper I work on, and I kind of just wanted to keep it together. It's been shown twice, and it's been shown together, but doesn't necessarily have to stay together, right. Where other works were very specific as one piece, like Score is one piece, and those drawings will never be separated from each other. This doesn't have to stay in that genre, but I think that things kind of, I don't know, have you ever I do a lot of cooking, and then there are some months when you're just like, you try like every Moroccan recipe that it's just like a taste that you can't get enough of in a way, and then for whatever reason you're like, oh, now I'm eating somewhere else now, It's a little bit like that. You get obsessed with something and you don't even know why. It's just like a craving kind of thing, and it's just what's occupying my time in that moment. And then sometimes the things cross into one another. Or sometimes a sculpture will happen, and it's just kind of it's that thing you have to sort of be very, very aware in the studio of what. We keep using the same word, but I guess there's a reason. You have to be very aware of where your energy is and really go with that. For me, anyway.
Yeah, I think for me it's been I think because you're actually looking at three different series of works here. They've been real explorations of slightly different approaches. So, for example, the work on the tables, it was made for Monash University for their artist proof, and this is a kind of attempt to lift the work past the paper thing, which is, or to take it into another space, which has a little greater longevity. And the papers, what's on the wall, there are three different series. One which is an exploration of the waveform as a loop, so the sound of the sound. The sound of the sound. Yes. And the other one is as a whole sort of Archimedes, like exploration of the relationship between Archimedes and the turntable, and again the kind of sound. It's a little bit the sound of the forms that we associate to sound becoming a part of the work itself. But then those sort of more graphic forms are very, very, very old fractals. So they're like turn of the century pieces of mathematics. There were two up the end here. This is called the Wunderlich curves. It's actually by a man called Mr. Wonderful, Mr. Wunderlich.
So good.
And the other guy is called Hilbert, and that was his kind of algorithm. So all of these little algorithms had people, they were mathematicians who put them, and I've kept their names, and the other ones, they're Archimedes spirals, so they're very, very, very old piece of mathematics there. So there's been an exploration inside exploring different parts of the kind of mathematical history, and then the other ones, of course, are this very different, well, the magic of it's Turkish history, I guess. You know, marbling was very secret, and yeah. So they, I think, like you, they're sort of like you are following, like all artists. You know, everyone follows their nose around. It's like you go here, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, I want to go over there now. Or things open up inside of the process of making. I guess it's why we make, you know, we make things because you can have an idea about something, but it's only when you actually make it and look at it and experience it that all the ideas that take you forward come from that experience, you know. So you're experiencing your own, the realisation of your own work and your own ideas sort of takes you forward.
If anyone has any questions in the audience, do feel free to ask, and we'll very happily incorporate them into the conversation. Yes, please.
I'm just a little confused. When you say you're using mats, is that to draw or is that putting sound through the graphite?
What? Oh, okay. If I was to make a loop antenna, yeah, if you just took a loop like that,
yeah,
and it was made out of metal or it was made out of graphite, it would work. But the longer the loop, the more likely it is to be down in the frequency range that we can hear. And I'm sorry, I'm going to probably bamboozle you a little bit further, but the electromagnetic spectrum begins at extremely low frequency, the ELF, it goes sort of ELF, VLF, the very low frequency, you know, UHF, high frequency, ultra high frequency, then it goes to light, and it goes to X-rays, and it's sort of, you know, it's this fantastic spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's huge. Whatever takes place in the VLF part of the electromagnetic spectrum, you can hear by just plugging into a microphone input, because it's the right frequency range. To hear other things, like I can tell you that this is an oscillator and it's oscillating at 9 megahertz, but you can't hear it unless you plugged a radio scanner in that let you hear up that high. So, but we can hear what's going on down in the audio frequency range.
you're using graphite as your antenna to receive that energy source.
Yeah, so, but the very low frequency part of the spectrum, you need quite big loops. So what I've been doing is trying to make as big a loop as possible. And the best way to make, and this is how, I mean, I think you would remember that in former times when you had a mobile phone, you had a little antenna sticking up. And now it's, I don't know if you probably haven't taken your phone apart to have a look, I have. It's tiny and it's a little fractal. And what they've done is that they've made something that was long, really small, by making it, sort of crunching it all up into space. So that's all I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to crunch up that loop and get as much loop onto my paper or onto a standard piece of art paper or onto the glass as possible.
I feel the exact same way that graphite is conductive. I feel the exact same way. It's like, but our energy is our fascination, like where our energy comes from, are from just different frequencies, right? But we both believe so passionately about the same thing.
Well, it's interesting that all those words you just use have like double meanings.
Right, exactly. Well, that's what I was saying earlier.
Yeah,
that
the frequency
it's the same. It's the same thing.
You know, like the emotional,
exactly.
Scientific, but both produce drawings and both allow us to experience in a different way.
And Agnes as well. Like she's like obsessed with a rhythm.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look now, if you look at sort of electronic circuitry, there's such extraordinary abstraction going on inside it, and that now that it's all gone graphic, and now that we're seeing graphene, this single layer of graphite, that so 3 years ago, two Russian scientists won the Nobel Prize for using a piece of sticky tape and pulling off a single layer of graphite. It's called graphene, and now they're looking at technological development based around graphene that will replace silicon, because silicon's very environmentally problematic to produce, and graphite's naturally occurring. So they're doing an enormous amount of work, and it will change the size of our electronics quite dramatically. But how weird that was a sticky tape and a pencil that they won the Nobel Prize with.
So good. It's awesome.
So the lo-fi, hi-fi, it's the lo-fi, and I think it's with Agnes's work as well. You see that real interest in abstraction and repetition and shapes and forms, and what you start to see is that possibly, is a big part of certainly our technological future in a sense. It's kind of weird. I think it's a really interesting point that we're at this time, where we see drawing and whole history of graphite coming to meet technology as it's just shrunk down to drawing. What's interesting is that the marks that you're making, they might, now seem like incredibly intuitive, and as it's a conduit, but who's to say what they will be? We're looking at more looking more at Agnes's work and mathematics as a way of looking at those kinds of energetic structures, but who knows where that future of electronics is going to go, really. But yeah, I mean, the other interesting thing is my partner has been studying perfume. He's been David Haynes, and it's the electromagnetic. You can smell it. You can smell it. That's what you can smell. You can smell the electromagnetic the electromagnetic field of matter, and that's what his whole paper was about. It's quite weird, yeah. The spin of the electrons.
Do you think it's the same with taste?
No, apparently taste is different. Yeah, taste is some kind of lock and key thing. You have to have the receptors for it. But smell is more like hearing.
When these were exhibited they were in a Biennale in South America, and they were exhibited in the round in its own room. And at the opening, people came into the room, and the first thing they did was they went right up to the drawings and they started smelling them. And someone took photographs, and everyone is just like,
because of the wax.
Yeah. So what happened was, like, in the room, because I don't know why, but you could probably tell us exactly, but the smell concentrated, right? So I guess when they walked in, they had a sort of people were just compelled
The hive
to
mind.
go up, and it's funny because I've had the experience where people are compelled to touch them, and there's always someone saying don't touch them, but there isn't the sign that says don't smell them. So everyone was just like, and you just walked in, I walked into the room at the opening, and just people were just like, I think they thought that was part of it was just the smell. That was, it was really fascinating. I have all these pictures of people just right up to it.
Were they French? Were they?
They were. I guess I hadn't thought about that, but they were.
But I imagine that if they've got lights on them, that the wax would activate a little
Really?
bit. Yeah.
They got hot or
Warm, yeah. Do we need to be warm?
I don't know. It gets really hot in my studio, and I never smell them. I don't mean smell. I don't have. I only really experience the beeswax smell when I have the pots going. But if I haven't been in the studio for a week or so and then just came in, I don't have that overwhelming experience of smelling the wax.
Wow, I
I could
wonder
be
what it
used to it. I
was.
don't
I
know.
wonder what something kind of triggered.
Yeah, it's
the-
something. Like
something
I thought
triggered
maybe
the-
something visually at first triggered it, but I don't know. It was I've never had that experience ever again. Like I mean, I've never experienced that where it was so like such a sort of visceral reaction in a good way. I thought it was kind of in a good way.
It's interesting when I look at your photographs, I see they have a very strong sculptural element. They're really capturing three-dimensional landscape forms in the photographic medium. Can you talk a little bit more about sculpture and photography, other aspects of your practice?
It's a funny sort of trajectory because I always drew, and the sculpture. I mean, I think as a young artist drawing, you're sort of like just sort of shepherded into painting. And I never really liked painting, or I didn't think I was a very good painter anyway. And I struggled with that. And so my paintings became sort of very three-dimensional because I just was always kind of tinkering and making things. And so I would sort of like make these things and then just like screw them to these paintings. And they were terrible. they were just terrible. And another artist sort of helped me see something, there. And I then just started making sculpture, but they were still kind of attached to the wall. I still had that draw to the wall rather than that sort of 3D thing that sculpture is supposed to be. And I was in an exhibition, and it got reviewed very nicely, and before I know it, I was Linda Madelon, the sculptor. That sort of preceded my growth, and it kind of went way ahead of me, and I never felt like I was a sculptor. And I had to actually pull away from sculpture to really do what I feel I do best, which is draw. And now, anyway, I think that it's more fluid now as I get older. I don't see the things in these sort of separate categories so much. And but then I did, and then I don't know. It's sort of a very like organic process, the way sort of things came back around to really just making drawing. And the photographs, in a way, I think were just sort of always there, but I never considered myself a photographer in that way, that I never considered myself somebody that made sculpture. And sort of circumstances came around that I had the opportunity to print these. I don't see the photograph any differently than I see a drawing. So when I snap the photograph, I'm just sort of snapping something that's interesting to me. And then some of them just do that thing for me that making a drawing does. And I don't know if I can describe what that is. It's just the thing that happens. And the drawings for me really are just like extensions of drawings. I'm not like a technical photographer. I don't, as photographs, my niece, who's a photography student, printed the edition out for me, and she said, Aunt Linda, what I really love about your photographs is how bad they are. And I loved that, and she was excited about that because they're like kind of, if you go up really close to one of the two that are exhibited here, they're very, what's the term? Pixelated. And that doesn't bother me. Like I think a photographer that would like bother, but it doesn't bother me because I like that thing where you can sort of go away and come to it, and it's just like a drawing. So not all my photographs function, I think that I have to really edit them. I don't do anything to them. I don't put them in Photoshop. The photograph actually happens in that same way that a drawing happens. You do lots of things in the studio, and then some things are the thing. and I see the photographs the exact same way.
I'd like to thank Joyce and Linda for being here and sharing their insights.